Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this morning's Zoom webinar presented by the Chamber of Commerce for Greater Moncton. Today, we're very pleased to have with us Mark Black of Reservo Training Solutions. My name is John Wishart, and I'm the CEO of the Chamber. Bonjour à tous, bienvenue au webinaire Zoom de ce matin, présenté par la Chambre de commerce pour le Grand Moncton. Aujourd'hui, il est mon plaisir, bienvenue Mark Black. Je m'appelle John Wishart, je suis le PDG de la Chambre. Mark is a Moncton-based speaker, author, and coach who specializes in helping people and organizations work through challenges and build resilience. And in case you weren't already aware of Mark's own journey, here's just a brief synopsis of his already remarkable life. So Mark was born with a life-threatening heart defect, and he underwent 2 open-heart surgeries before the age of 1. 22 years later, he survived a very dangerous heart and double lung transplant. And after that, Mark became the first man in history to run a marathon with someone else's heart and lungs. And then he did it 3 more times. So we have with us today a guy who knows a thing or two about facing challenges and overcoming them. And that's why we're so pleased he was able to join us today to talk about how all of us can face the challenge of the economic crisis brought on by COVID-19 and how we can build resilience in our lives and in our businesses. So before I turn the virtual podium over to Mark, I wanted to remind everyone that you can pose a question to Mark at any time during his presentation via the chat button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can just type your question there and I'll pose as many as possible to Mark as time allows at the end of his presentation. Also, please note that we've muted everyone's microphone except for our presenter. And with that, I'll turn the podium over to Mark. Mark?
Good morning, everybody. Glad to see you all virtually, if not in person for now. Thank you for the opportunity to have an excuse to get dressed up again, or dressed normally again. I think, like probably many of you, I've spent far too many days in t-shirts and sweatpants over the last month or two. And so today we're going to talk about a framework for how to deal with the challenge and change that we are all facing right now. And I don't for a second pretend to have all of the answers. In fact, I don't know if I have any of the answers. What I do have are some strategies that will help you to think through the changes and challenges that you're dealing with in a more strategic way. Because hopefully at this point, we're over the major shock, right? And the major reactive mode that we all kind of go into when we face major adversity. And so now is an opportunity to start being a little more forward thinking, a little more strategic. Hopefully we've caught the life preserver, gotten onto the lifeboat, and we're staying afloat. If that's not the case, then I hope you can figure that out soon. And this is about how do we process through what could be the next 3, 6, 9 months. Who knows how long this is going to last. And what I know for sure is that principles don't change, right? So while the situations may be different, principles apply across the board. And these are principles. They work in every context, I believe, for every business, and as well as your personal life. You know, right now, our personal lives and our professional lives are melding together in a way even more than they previously did, right? Because we're working from home. How many meetings have you had where your kids are popping into the office or across the screen, or somebody else's kids are? You know, we're trying to figure out how to balance home life and work life in a very different environment. And so these principles can be applied to your professional life as well as your personal life. And in today's presentation, I'm going to share a little bit of my story that John alluded to already, in fits and spurts, to provide you with some context. Because I believe that when we understand how these apply in very real situations, we can begin to see how they can apply to us in our own lives. And so I want you to imagine, if you can, sitting in a hospital waiting room. It's been 3 weeks since you've been admitted to hospital, and it's been 3 months since you last felt like yourself. You know that something is seriously wrong. You know that you are in pretty significant trouble. You just don't know exactly how bad the situation is yet and what will come next. But you're trying to prepare as best as you can. And so you're sitting there waiting. The clock seems to tick very slowly. You're nervous. And finally, a doctor comes through the door. And as soon as you see his face, you know it's not good news. He walks in, he sits down across from you. He's got a medical file in his hand with all of the test results that they've done. He looks you in the eye and he says, "You need a heart and 2 new lungs, and you need them now." In an instant, your life changes. What do you do? How do you react? What's your next move? I used to give that scenario to people thinking that a lot of people couldn't relate. And yet I bet every single one of you can relate to that situation right now. Because a month or two ago, 6 weeks ago, whenever that time was, when everything sort of shut down, it felt like it was very, very quick. In the span of a deal to, oh my goodness, this is going to affect us significantly. And then the roller coaster began and the dominoes started to fall. And so we get into emergency mode, right? What do we do? How do we react? And sitting in that chair, listening to that news, I had to work at figuring out, what do I do next? There was no forward thinking. There was no strategy. It was, how do I survive the next couple of days? But over time, I began to process through it as you've been processing through it now. And the first thing I was encouraged to do was to go back home and decide whether or not I even wanted to have a transplant. See, getting a transplant is not as simple as just needing one, even in Canada. As we speak, there are 4,500 Canadians waiting for life-saving transplants. Statistically, 3,000 or so of them will die, 300 of them or so will die this year because there just aren't enough donors for everybody who needs one. So we had to decide if I wanted to wait on the list for something that may never happen or go back home and spend whatever time I did have left with my family and my friends. When I asked the doctor, how much time do I have? He said, a year, maybe 2. And so I made a very difficult decision to say, I'm going to go take this big risk, go on the transplant list, and hope that something happens. And that involved a dramatic amount of change. We had to figure out what to do with our family because I had to move to Toronto in order to be put on the transplant list. So, and we were 6 in our family, my mom and dad and 3 younger brothers at the time. So mom and dad had to figure out how to make that work, and we ended up splitting up the family rather than moving everybody. My dad and I packed our bags, we moved to Toronto, and the rest of the family stayed at home. When I arrived, they gave me a beeper and said, when this beeps, it means we found your donor, come in and have your transplant. By the way, this is where I have to stop when I'm speaking to people under 25 and explain what a beeper is, because most of them don't understand. It's kind of like a one-way cell phone. But in any case, we took this back to where I was staying in Toronto and I waited for it to beep. And perhaps like you've spent the last few weeks, you kind of wait on the edge of your seat because you're waiting for that news to drop that's going to either make things better or make things worse. But you know that there's news coming constantly that's going to affect you. And so the first few weeks, every time the microwave beeps, every time the phone rings, we're waiting for that beeper and it's not coming. And the longer it drags on, the harder it becomes. After 4 months of waiting, my condition grew worse and I was deemed unsafe to stay outside of the hospital. I had a condition called ventricular tachycardia, which just means your heart races out of control spontaneously for no reason at all. And so the doctors recommended that I stay in hospital until I got a transplant. So again, major change. Imagine packing what little belongings you had that you took from your original home to your second home, and then moving those into an 10 by 10 hospital room. And that's going to be home for the foreseeable future. When I got to that hospital, I said, how long do I have to stay? And the doctor said, well, you need to stay until you get a transplant. She was too professional to say it, but in her eyes, what I heard was, you're going to stay here until you get a transplant or until you die. And chances are good, it's going to be the second. And so as we sit cocooned in our houses over the last month and a half, I'm realizing how valuable that experience was because while it's difficult, I have not found it probably as hard as many because I've done this before where I've had to stay in one place for a long period of time. And while I would love to tell you that initially when I first went through this, I figured out all of the answers. The truth is, probably like all of us, right, initially through this experience, I felt it incredibly challenging. I was angry. I was frustrated. I was bitter. How many of us have felt those feelings over the last few weeks? We hate not having control, especially if we're business owners, right? Part of the reason we got into business, if you're an entrepreneur especially, is because we wanted some modicum of control. We wanted to be our own boss. We wanted to do our own thing. If you work within an organization, then you like to manage your department or manage the people that you work with. We like to have that sense of autonomy. And in situations like this, a lot of that is taken away from us. And how do we cope? Well, as I sat in that room for weeks and weeks and weeks and felt worse and worse and worse, it took a conversation with my mom. She came into the hospital room one day. She sat down beside me in my bed. And she said, Mark, you know what? You have to make a choice. She said, you can choose to keep feeling sorry for yourself if you want to. I understand. I get it. You're entitled. But how is it working? If you keep feeling the way you're feeling and thinking the way you're feeling, where will you be next week or next month? You'll be more tired, more angry, more frustrated, more bitter. But your environment won't have changed. The situation won't have changed. You'll just be worse. So you go ahead and keep feeling the way you're feeling and thinking the way you're thinking for as long as you need to. But if I were you, I would start to try and focus on what's going right instead of what's going wrong. I would start to focus on where the opportunities lie amidst this very difficult situation. And I have to say that while that is incredibly good advice, I was a young person listening to my parent. And all of the parents here know how well that usually goes. I believe my response was, whatever, Mom, you don't get it. But over the course of weeks, her advice sunk in. And pretty soon, it made a lot of sense. Or maybe because I'm a man, I decided it was my idea, and then it made a lot of sense. In any case, I understood the power of what she was trying to teach me, which is that I had to learn to accept the parts of this that were difficult. And so I want to share with you a quick visual tool to help you think through this. So I call this the time energy spending strategy. And we can think about this in terms of how we are spending our time and our energy, okay? So right now, we have control over very few things. But if I asked you to take a piece of paper and list all of the things that are stressing you out, that are concerning you, that are making you worried right now, and write all of those down. And we're gonna go pretty quickly today because we have to get through the whole presentation in the hour. But if I was working with you in a smaller group, we would spend 10, 15 minutes doing this. I would encourage you to do that after this webinar is over. List all of the things that are occupying your brain space right now, that are keeping you up at night, that are making you worried and concerned. And then once you have that list, I would like you to plot that on this graph. And let me explain it to you really quickly. This is based on a psychological principle called the locus of control, which basically says that the closer we get to ourselves and our own person, the more control we have. The further out into the world we go, the less control we have. So right in the middle of that diagram is you. You get to decide how you think. You get to decide, what you eat, what you wear, some really basic things that you get to decide every single day. You get to decide your habits. And then in that black circle with labeled some, we have the things that you have influence over, right? So you can make decisions that are going to impact what happens there, but you don't have complete control. There would be lots of things in your business right now, and in your organization and at home that would fit in that category. And then we would go into the gray and even out into the black void on the outside. And those are things that we have little to no control over at all. My favorite example of that is the weather. And then if I asked you to say, okay, so you've plotted all of those things on that graph. Now, if you were to do a time energy diary for a day, I invite you to do that and figure out, where am I spending the majority of my mental time and energy? What am I spending most of my time thinking about? Where am I exerting most of my energy? What am I working on every day? And see where that lines up on that graph. And if you find that you're spending a lot of your time and your energy, mental and emotional, on things on the outside, then you have work to do. Because what we don't want to do is spend our time and our energy worrying about things that we can't fix. Now, it's human nature, we're all going to do it, but we want to minimize that as much as possible. So when we first heard about what was happening and when things began to shut down, we were spending a lot of time, I'm sure, worrying. What if this happens? What if that happens? How long are we going to be closed? What if, how bad is this virus, and who's going to get sick, and all of those things. And over time, we've processed that, and hopefully we're doing better and spending more of our time in the middle of the circle than the outside. But this is a tool that you can use constantly to check in with yourself and say, am I using my time and energy wisely? Because here's the thing. There are only, as far as I can figure, 2 finite resources in the world: time and energy. We can get more of just about anything else if we're resourceful enough. But everybody only gets 24 hours in a day, even though we all know somebody who seems to get far more done in a day than we do. And we only have so much energy. We can certainly apply tools and strategies to preserve our energy and to use it better. But at the end of the day, we only have so much to give. How many of us have had a point in our lives where we got done the end of the workday and went, I got nothing left? So if we recognize that we have not enough time, not enough energy to just spend it willy-nilly, then we want to be strategic about it. And what we want to do is figure out, where can I spend my time and my energy on the things that are going to have the biggest impact for my life and for my organization? Where can I use what I have, my resources, to make a bigger impact where they're going to count the most? And that means I'm going to spend it on the things that I influence and I control. So rather than scrolling social media and spiraling out of control and getting frustrated and angry, we spend our time in the middle of the circle, working with the people in our office, doing the things that we can do. If we can't go on our Friday lunches downtown out to a nice restaurant like we like to do, can we order Skip the Dishes and have a similar experience inside so that we can still do something even though we can't do what we want to do? Where can we take the time and resources that we have and make the biggest impact possible? That's what acceptance is all about. So the first question I want you to ask yourself today is, what do I have to accept? What are the parts of this situation that, while challenging and difficult, I need to accept so that I can move on, so that we can be productive, so that we can do what we need to do? Once I began to learn this strategy, it completely changed my experience in the hospital, and it's also changed my experience going through this as a business owner. Because I was very quickly this time, slower the last time, able to recognize, what could I do and what can I not do? What do I have control over and what can I not fix? So in the context of the hospital, I couldn't change the fact that I was sick. I couldn't change the fact that the only way to survive was to stay in that hospital. That a lot of my individual freedoms and choices had been taken away from me. But that was a sacrifice that I needed to make in order to have the best possible outcome. So I hear a lot of people right now talking about how frustrating it is to lose our sense of freedom and control. And I understand that, but at the same time, that's the sacrifice that we make so that we get the outcome that we want. And so we begin to accept the things that are outside of our control so that we can fix the things that we can control, which moves us to the next step in the process of this resilience roadmap framework that I want to share with you today, which is to adapt. So once we've, just one second here, let me share this. Here we go. So once we have accepted what we can't control, we don't want to just stay there, okay? Because if we stay in acceptance mode and we don't do anything, then we become victims. And we're starting to see some people, some organizations doing that right now. They're just throwing up their hands in the air and saying, there's nothing we can do. Woe is me. It isn't fair. And the truth is, no, it isn't fair. But so what? Right? Life is hard. Business is hard. If you want to succeed, you have to do it even though it's not fair. And so we move from acceptance into adaptation. Human beings are incredible adaptation machines. Every single person on this call right now has the ability to adapt in incredible ways. You may have forgotten, but you have the ability to do it. And right now, more than ever, it's absolutely critical that you do. because the companies, organizations, and human beings who adapt proactively right now, who are willing to not go with the flow, but roll with the punches, are going to find creative solutions, are going to make innovative choices, are going to adapt their products and their services to be relevant in the market, and are therefore going to do better than those companies who do not. So up there, I have examples of what happens when we don't adapt. Right? Anybody play cassette tape lately? I remember very vividly, as I'm sure many of you do, not only when film was the only modality, but even when digital cameras were moving into vogue, a lot of photographers, hardcore photographers, the real artists would say, look, all of you peons can buy your digital cameras, that's really cute, but real artists will always use film. And eventually that's changed, right? And then newspapers right now are struggling to figure out a way to change their modality so that they can still be relevant, and on and on and on it goes. Through this turmoil and this challenge right now, businesses and services will emerge that never existed before because they're addressing new challenges or addressing solutions to the challenges that this situation is presenting. So if you've been following the stock market a little bit and watching Zoom stock, for example, it's absolutely exploded over the last 4 months. And there are going to be lots more innovative products and services that allow us to do this kind of thing better. And there are going to be all kinds of other innovative solutions as well. There are also going to be existing businesses who do very good jobs of pivoting, of adapting what they do so that they can be relevant in a new world. And that's what you all want to be thinking about right now, is how can I adapt now rather than later to what the market is telling us? And for sure, we don't have all the answers to that yet. And it's an ever-growing question. But listen to your customers. Ask them questions. Ask them what they need. And I've seen some of you doing that. I've seen it on social media. I've seen it in my email inbox, and it's fantastic. By the way, this is not pre-planned and not a paid advertisement by any stretch, but the Chamber of Commerce and John and your team, you've done an incredible job of keeping people up to date. The daily updates for business owners on what's going on has been critical because we need that kind of frequency because of how much things are changing. You've pivoted events to be online so that people can still learn and grow and feel a part of a community. It's absolutely fantastic and it's incredibly important. And so how can you and your business do the same thing? I saw one company who does, it's a restaurant. And of course they couldn't have people come in. So what did they do? Well, they didn't just pivot to doing takeout orders, which is an obvious pivot, but they also said, look, we've got more fresh produce and meat than we can use now. So how can we leverage that? And they figured out ways to do boxed groceries for people who don't want to go out and shop. Brilliant, right? Now, will that be a long-lasting solution and a continuous revenue stream that they continue to use? Time will tell. But if it gets popular with people and they start to use the service now, even when they have the ability to go shop for themselves, they may choose not to. So what are the adaptations that you can make to make yourself as relevant as possible in the market right now? And a lot of the time when we talk about adaptation, people get overwhelmed and they start to put up the roadblocks because they say, look, we're a big organization. We can't just pivot quickly like a one-person operation can. Absolutely true. But we don't need to always make massive shifts here. We're talking about 1%, 2% shifts sometimes. When I was sitting in the hospital and we realized that life had changed and that I needed to make adaptations in order to be comfortable, in order to feel like myself. We realized that the biggest changes that needed to be made were relatively simple. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples. Some of the things we did, we brought in my bedspread and my sheets and my pillows from home and put those on the hospital bed. Because if you stayed in a hospital, you know that they're not the nicest, most comfortable bedding. We brought in a TV and a VCR, it was 2002, so that we could watch movies on a bigger screen than the little 6-inch thing that was in the hospital, and we could watch movies. We brought in a stockpile of snacks because we all know hospital food is not so great, and you don't always want to eat on the clock that is the hospital schedule. And I also learned to adapt my sleeping habits to the hospital clock because they came in every morning at 6 o'clock in the morning to take your blood. I would say every day, I'm here all day. Why don't you come at 2 in the afternoon? But it had to be at 6 a.m. And so through all these little tiny adaptations, I was able to live a different but very good life within the confines of that room. So that by 2 months in, it felt like home. We called it my dorm room because I was just at a university, and we had posters on the wall and pictures everywhere, and I had books around and a TV, and it felt very much like that. So we have an incredible capacity to normalize the most abnormal things. We just have to first believe that we can, and then adapt with an open mind. Try different things. See what works, see what doesn't. What will kill you and your organization emotionally right now is to be stunted in your thinking, to resist change, to say, but this is the way we've always done it. To think right away that this won't work or that won't work without really exploring the idea. And the companies that are willing to try crazy things, or at least entertain crazy ideas, are going to come up with some really great solutions right now. And I encourage you to just be open to doing that. So let me show you just really quickly in a really simple exercise how quickly adaptation can work. Stand up at your desk if you can, or wherever you're sitting right now, because probably we've been sitting for a couple of hours. And I just want you to take your arms and cross your arms, however you normally do that. Okay, and now I want you to try and cross your arms the other way. And when you try to do, most people, like the first time I tried to do that, I couldn't even quite figure out how to make my arms go. But if you do it a few times, you start to get the hang of it. You're like, oh, okay, yeah, the thing goes the other way. Now here's the thing, if you do that repeatedly for 4, 5, 6 days, pretty soon that becomes fairly normal. And if you were to continue to do it for months, it would become the default. That's how adaptation works, right? It's uncomfortable at first and it gets easier and easier and easier. If you want to get really good at adaptation, here's another crazy idea that you can try. I have been doing cold showers for the last 6 months. That sounds kind of crazy, I know. Here's the reason I do it. I do it for 2 reasons. Number one, there's some great physiological benefits to cold water, especially after exercise, because it cools your system, reduces inflammation, etc. But it also does something really powerful to your brain when it comes to adaptation. Because you get into cold water, what happens? Whether you've jumped in a cold pool before or accidentally got into the shower when the water was cold, and it's uncomfortable, right? We don't like it. But after a minute or two in the cold pool, you get acclimatized and pretty soon it feels normal. And trust me, if you do it in the cold shower, the same thing happens. And what it teaches you, building the neural pathways in your brain, is that discomfort and pain are not the same thing. Most of us have a difficult time with change, not so much because of the change, but because of the fear of the change. And so if we can just get a little more comfortable with being uncomfortable, a little more comfortable with trying things that we've never tried before, we're going to become better at adapting. And we live in a world right now, COVID-19 or not, where adaptation is going to be a valuable, valuable skill, perhaps the most valuable skill. And so you want to be at the front end and not the back end of the adaptation curve, right? Because we know this from studying any trend in society, whether it's technology or anything else. There is a bell curve for adaptation, right? There are the early adopters, the people who get in early and they jump on the bandwagon right away. You think of any new technology, like when the first iPhone came out, they're the people that are in line at the Apple Store to get the new iPhone. Then you have the people that are the massive middle, which is most of us, right? We wait for our trendy friend to try it out. When they tell us it works well, then we give it a shot. And then finally, we have the stragglers who wait until everybody else has it. And then finally, when they can't avoid doing it anymore, they get one. So you may still know a couple of people who don't own a smartphone because they're just hanging on to the bitter end. But if you're in business today, you have one, even though several years ago, you might have been one of those people who said, I'm never going to bother with one of those things. Eventually, you realized you didn't have a choice. So we all adapt because we have to survive. The question is, do we do it first or do we do it last? And I would argue that the sooner you do it, the more advantage you have and the better off you're going to be, the better off your organization is going to be. So start thinking about how can we be proactive in how we adapt to this new reality and how it evolves over the next several months. As I adapted in the hospital, it made my situation easier to deal with. But let's be really clear. It doesn't fix everything and it doesn't make everything easy. And frankly, I don't think it's supposed to. You aren't in the business world because you like things to be easy. If you were, you would go do something else. If easy was your priority, you would go do something else. We like a challenge, hopefully. And we understand that people who are willing to take on challenges are those who end up being more successful. Businesses who take on difficult challenges and solve difficult problems end up being compensated very well for doing that. So it's not that we want to make things easier necessarily, we just want to make them better. And when we adapt proactively, we're going to do that. And so my situation became better, but it still wasn't fixed. Okay, I was still in the hospital, I was still dying, it was still very, very difficult. And when we get into the messy middle of change, which is really what I'm talking about there, where we've gone through the initial hard time, we've accepted where we are, we're starting to adapt and change to the new reality, then it's a question of how do we sustain this change? And you may be in that situation right now if you've made significant changes in your operations. Or if you've had to shut down completely and you're now starting to worry about, well, what happens? How long do I have to do this? Is we get into that messy middle where we can't see the end and we're a long ways from the beginning and we just don't know kind of what to do. And people say, well, how do we keep this momentum going? What's the secret to being motivated? You're the motivational speaker, Mark. How do you do that? And I hate the term motivational speaker simply because I can't motivate you. I can motivate me, but you have to motivate you. And you have to work at helping your employees and your team to be motivated as well. So how do you do that? Well, I think the solution to that is a very powerful vision. We have to know where we want to go. We have to know what our goals are. We have to know what the ultimate vision is. Now, I get it. Right now, you may not know what's going to happen next week. How do you have goals? Well, I still think we can have long-term visions for where we're going. We may not have all of the answers of what's going to happen in the next 90 days, but we know where we're going to be 3 years from now, right? And so we need to have that long-term vision. The vision statement, if you have one in your organization, is a good place to start. And make sure that we, as an organization and as an individual, are passionate and excited about that vision. And if we aren't, then maybe we need to adjust it. Because here's the thing, when we have a very clear idea of where we're going and why we're going there, then we can get through just about anything. So people ask me, how did you survive 6 months in the hospital? 6 months in a 10 by 10 room, never left, couldn't leave. And I say I had support, community, mom, in my case, mom and dad and friends. So tap into community, absolutely important. Tap into things like this, like you're doing. And I had a clear vision of where I wanted to go. A powerful idea of what the future holds, and that idea has to be positive and exciting. It can't be the light at the end of the tunnel has to be a light and not a train coming, right? If the vision is doom and gloom, then it's hard to get anybody excited about that. Okay, so as a leader, we have to be the one who sets the positive aspiration for where we can go. But if we have that and we're excited about it, incredible things can happen. One of my favorite quotes comes from Friedrich Nietzsche, who said, "He who has a big enough why can endure any how." Forgive the sexist language. The person who has a big enough why can endure any how works just as well. Here's what that means. When you know why you're doing what you're doing, and why you're doing what you're doing matters to you, you're excited about it, it gets you fired up, it makes you feel good inside, then you will figure out the how. You know, right now, a lot of us are concerned about, well, what about this? And how are we going to do that? And how are we going to do this? And how are we going to do that? The hows will come. We are adaptation machines. We will figure that out. Everything is figure outable, is one of the things I like to say. And if you're an entrepreneur or a small business owner and you're a 1, 2, 3 person operation, you know this because you get into business and you have to do everything, right? You don't have an accounting department, you are the accounting department. You don't have a marketing department, you are the marketing department. And if you got into business like that, then you probably had a couple of the skills you needed and a lot of them that you didn't. That was the case for me. I got in, I wanted to be a speaker. This is what I like to do. This is my skill. I'm not an accountant. Ask my accountant, it's pretty bad. I'm not a marketer. I'm not a salesperson. I'm not a graphic designer. I'm not any of those things. I'm not a video editor. I'm not an AV team. And yet especially now, I'm having, well, over the last several years to keep my business going, I've had to learn all of those things. And now I'm having to learn a whole new set of skills about how to set up AV. I've got 3 cameras going and 2 lights, and we've got hardwired internet, and we've got all kinds of things happening right now to make sure that this works properly. I didn't know how to do any of that 2 weeks ago. So some people would sit and say, well, deliver this online. I've always delivered it in person. How in the world am I going to do this online? I like to speak face to face with people. I don't just want to sit behind a screen and have slides go by and narrate slides. How am I going to do that? And so some people would say, I can't do it. I don't know how. Other people say, well, let's figure it out. One of the phrases I would encourage you to adopt in your organization, and I steal this from a friend of mine, Jennifer Spear, who I think stole it from somebody else, but it's a powerful phrase. And the phrase is, how might we? How might we do this? So let's pretend for a minute I want to accomplish X, Y, or Z, but we don't know how to do that. Well, how might we do that? Let's just pretend that we can do anything we want to do. How could we do that? What could we figure out? You know, I've walked by Main Street and see the banks, right? And the population that still wants to go into the bank every single day and do their banking. Some of us are just, we're okay, we can do it online and that's fine. But you have customers who can't do that, right? And who will refuse to do that. And yet you've got to do social distancing. How do you do that? You might have just said, well, we you know, you can't do it. We can't have people all gathered together. Well, no, you figure it out, right? And so I've seen that you've got the queues and they're outside and you've got tape marks on the sidewalk. If anybody had suggested that to you a year ago, it would have sounded insane. But you figured it out. Why? Because you had to. And you had to, and you found the way to do it because you were motivated enough to do it. So if you want to stay motivated to keep these changes going, to continue to adapt effectively, how do you do that? You do that by knowing very clearly and concisely what you're trying to accomplish and why you're trying to accomplish it. And if you can know those 2 things, it will carry you through tremendous amounts of adversity. So the next question I want to ask you today to think about is aiming, and how can I aim high enough? Let's go back here for a second. So I want to tell you this story. We shared in the beginning that I've run some marathons. And I want to tell you really quickly about when I decided to run the first one. It was 7 days after my transplant. So I had a heart and double lung transplant on September the 7th, 2002. On September the 6th at 10:15 at night, I'm in my room watching TV like I did every night for 6 months. And a nurse comes to the door and says, Mark, there's a call for you at the nurse's station. And I think that's really weird. I've got a phone right beside my bed. I don't get calls at the nurse's station. What's going on? And I walk down the hall and I go into the nurse's station and I pick up a phone. And a woman on the other end says, Mr. Black, I think we have a set of heart and lungs for you. And there's a long, awkward pause. And I manage a thank you. I go back home, back to my room, excited, nervous, call my mom. Mom, I just got the call. You need to come to the hospital. I'm going to have my transplant. Mom comes to the hospital. We wait for hours and hours and hours, agonizing, waiting for the surgeons to come. Finally, at 5 a.m. on September the 7th, they come into the room. Okay, Mark, it's time to go. Very matter of fact, very operational, because this is what they do every day. But I'm looking at my mom and she's looking at me and we're both realizing this may be the last time we see each other. What do you say? And I said, Mom, I'm going to see you soon. And they wheeled me into the operating room. They tell me I was in surgery for 7 hours and then in the intensive care unit for 5 days. And it was somewhere around the 5th day when I was really conscious for the first time. And I sat up in my bed and I felt this strong, steady heartbeat in my chest. I felt someone else's heart beating in my chest. And I thought, I wonder what's possible now. Because prior to the transplant, I could not climb a flight of stairs without getting out of breath. I couldn't walk from the car to the front door of the grocery store without getting out of breath. Now I could breathe easily, and my heart was strong. And I thought, I wonder what's possible now. And so I decided that day, I want to run a marathon. Now, was I in any condition to run marathons? Hardly. I'm going to show you the picture again. It's not pretty, but it's powerful. So I'm sitting in this bed. I've got about 40 surgical staples across my chest because that's how they do the incision. People hear heart surgery and they automatically think of the vertical zipper, but it actually goes across. I've had a few chest tubes removed from my right ear left. I call those the bullet holes. And I've still got a couple of chest tubes in. I've got a wire that's still in my heart monitoring rhythm and pressure. I weigh about 80 pounds in that picture. My normal weight's around 120. I haven't walked in 10 days. I hadn't run in 15 years. I said that day, I think I'm going to go run a marathon. Now, did I get out of bed the next day and run marathons? Hardly. I started with 1 pound hand weights in the hospital gym. You feel pretty tough as a 24-year-old guy walking into a gym, lifting the pink 1 pound weight to do arm curls, but that's where it started. I think I did 3 minutes on the treadmill that first day. But every day, well, 3 days a week, I would go back to that hospital gym, and then at home, I would do my own workouts. After the first 3 months of mandatory rehab were over, I began to run on my own. First, I did a 5K and then a 10K. Celebrated my 25th birthday by running a half marathon. And then 2.5 years later, crossed the finish line of that first marathon. And I share those pictures with you, not to say, hey, aren't I special, look what I did, but to say what the power is when you have a powerful vision of the future. When you can see in your mind's eye where things can go, the motivation to take the action required to do that begins to get easier. Now, to be very clear, this whole framework is 6 steps. I've focused on the 3 most critical ones for today's session. If we have more time, another time, or when I go into an organization, we go through all 6 steps in the process. And the next step is all about the action plan, right? Because you can't just dream it into existence, but it needs to start there. And so we have that aim, that vision of where we want to go. Then we say, okay, well, what are the steps to go from where we are today to there? And it might be that the answer is 26 steps or 5 steps or 108 steps. But we have to start somewhere. And we start by saying, what's the vision? And then what is the next step? I tell people all the time, after my presentations, I often get this feedback, wow, you ran a marathon. I could never do that. And I always say to people, no, you just don't want to, which is fine. Not everybody wants to run a marathon. I get it. Why do that if you don't want to? But my point is, if you wanted to, you could. Running a marathon requires very little skill. You have all the skill required to run a marathon when you're about 2.5 years old, whenever you learn to run for the first time. My 3-year-old has the skill level to run a marathon. He would have to build his endurance for sure. But essentially, it's 1 foot in front of the other foot until you get there. That's all it is. And so the business success, life success is exactly the same, in my opinion. We don't always know all of the steps. We just need to know what the vision is and what the next step is. There are many times in a marathon, I've run 4 of them now, where you don't feel like running anymore. For me, it usually happens around 2/3 to 3/4 of the way through, where the excitement of the beginning is long gone, and where the relief and excitement of the finish line is so far away that you still can't see it. And so it's hard to stay motivated, right? You look at the mile marker and go, geez, I still got an hour left to go. In my very first marathon, I ran a Blue Nose Marathon in 2007, I think it was. No, 2005. And you probably wouldn't remember unless you're a runner, but that year they had a hurricane. 80 to 90 kilometer per hour winds, pouring rain. And foolishly, I guess, I decided to run anyway. I trained so long that I just couldn't not do it. And so I ran through wind and rain and crazy conditions for hours and hours and hours. And I remember getting to 34 kilometers, about 8 kilometers left to go, and I crashed. I've been running for 4 hours. I'm soaking wet. I'm freezing cold. My legs feel like lead. I've got what I think is nothing left in the tank. I'm done. Like, I'm just not going to be able to finish this. And I was about to sit down on the curb on the side of the road and just wait for somebody to find me. And then I looked down at my hand. And on my hand, I had written my why, my reasons for doing what I was doing. I read the names of 3 of my friends. Friends I met while we were all waiting for our transplants together. Friends whose stories did not end as nicely as mine did. And I thought, Mark, you don't get to quit. You got to figure this out. And my heart was telling me that, but my brain was saying, it's too far. Your legs are tired. How are we going to do this? And that's when I realized I didn't have to run 8 more kilometers. I had to take the next step. That's all I had to do. I had to get back in motion again. And so I took 1 step. And then my brain said, okay, great, now do that again. And I did it again. And then again, and then again. And for the first 1.5 kilometers, all I could handle was focusing on the next kilometer marker. I'll get to the next kilometer marker, and then I'll reevaluate and decide if I'm going to keep going. And probably there are some of you listening to this right now who are at that stage in your business where you feel like you don't know if you have what it takes to get to the end, where you feel like you're in this void between the beginning and the end, and you can't see the finish line yet, and you're already exhausted, where you feel like you don't have all of the answers, you're not even sure where the finish line is. What do? Well, you take the next step. What's the next right action? And get up tomorrow and do that. And then get up the next day and do that. And then get up the next day and do that. And if you do that consistently over time, you will work your way through this. And if you do it with acceptance and with a mind for adaptation, you're also probably going to do it finding some new and creative solutions that may leave your business better off 3 years from now than it was before this all started. But to do that, we have to have the mentality, A, that we can, and B, that we need to apply strategic principles of resilience to that process so that we can do it purposefully and in a way that makes sense. I wanted to give you a resource, and then we can go into questions. Whoops. Let me go back here. There we go. I have a thing called a resilience assessment. It's a very simple tool. It's just a series of questions. And so if you just go into your phone right now and you enter in that toll-free number on the screen and then text the word chamber, it doesn't have to be all caps, or it doesn't matter what the capitalization is. It will text you right back, ask you for your email address. Enter just your email address, and it will text you a link to this assessment. And you'll get 2 pages. The first page is the assessment. The second page is the scoring for the assessment, so that you can then evaluate your answers. And what I encourage you to do is take the assessment now, apply some of what you just heard today, and take it again in 30 days or 60 days and see what happens. I can promise you that you're going to see movement in those numbers. You'll see a building in your resilience. Because here's the thing, everybody has the capacity. Everybody listening to this call right now is capable of being more resilient. The question simply is, can you be intentional about it? Can you apply some effort to it? Can you use some of these principles to do it? And if you do, you will see results. Doesn't mean everything's going to be fixed, everything's going to be easier. Just means it's going to be a little better. So, John, if we want to get into questions, we can do that now. And then I have a little offer for people at the end as well.
Sure. Thanks very much, Mark. I know you're not a fan of the term motivational speaker, but I know you have motivated people today, and we really appreciate that. It is now time for any questions. So if you want to click on that chat button at the bottom, il est maintenant temps pour les questions et réponses. Veuillez cliquer sur le bouton chat si vous souhaitez poser une question. There is, who do we have here? Fabian has said he agrees with 100% of what you've just said, Mark, which is great. And it's a lot of it is about the sort of mental preparation for this, resilience roadmap. He asked, do you have regular group sessions or discussions that you hold that people can join in? So I guess that dovetails into what you're going to say.
It does dovetail into what we're going to talk about. So why don't I do that for a minute while people think about if they have any other questions, and if not, that's okay. But yeah, I'll share with you how we work with organizations. Let me see here. Just see if I can do this. And then do this. There we go. So there's a couple different ways that we can work together. Obviously, I do seminars and workshops similar to this one inside organizations, so we can certainly talk about that. The way that I work with folks one-on-one is through something I call a laser coaching. And we call it laser because it's very, very focused and it's very short increments of time. And the reason for that is twofold. Number one, we're all busy. And so I've found working with clients over the last decade or so that the old model that a lot of people are used to of doing hour or 2 hour calls is not suitable to today's crazy work schedules. And that even when you have longer times, you end up wasting 20 minutes of chit chat. And really you just need to get down to the business of what needs to happen. So what laser coaching is I help you through the framework we just talked about in your personal and professional goals. So the first session we talk about what is it that you're really trying to accomplish organizationally or personally or both. And let's map out the strategy for doing that. And then we do weekly check-ins. Well, we do check-ins as often as you want, actually, to help make sure that you're continuing to do that and help you work through any roadblocks that you have. And so this particular offer is unlimited laser coaching for the entire year. And it comes with some bonuses like you'll see there. I have an annual conference that hopefully will be run in person in September, but that remains to be seen. If it's not, it'll be virtual. But it basically means I'm on your unofficial board of directors. I'm at your disposal whenever you need me. As long as you schedule the call ahead of time and you do your homework from the last one, then you can schedule another call. So if you'd like more information about laser coaching, you might want to just screen capture that, but you can just send me an email, mark@markblack.ca, or find me on any of the social media platforms. I'm on LinkedIn and Facebook and everywhere. And I'm happy to give you some details about how we can do that. Ditto, if you'd like to have me come in and work with your organization, just shoot me a message and we'll make that happen as well. In fact, let's see if I can go to that other slide. There we go. So there's the contact info if you need that. And it's been a treat to be with you today. And I don't know, John, if you've had any questions in the interim, but if not, we'll say have a great day.
There is one other question here, Mark.
Sure.
Joanne asks, how do you stop self-sabotaging? Which I think a lot of us do, we doubt often.
So this will sound like a self-serving answer, and it's not meant to be. So find somebody else if you like, rather if it isn't me. But a coach is one of the best ways to do that. And again, it doesn't have to be a paid coach, although the advantages of that are that person is then completely objective. But even a trusted coworker, anybody who you can trust to say, hey, call me out on my stuff, right? When I say something that is counterproductive to me, okay, so I don't know exactly, we could work through that, Joanne, and find out exactly how self-sabotage manifests for you. But for example, for me, I know that one of the things I will do sometimes is I will have an idea for something. I'll want to aim high. I'll want to stretch like I talked about. And then I'll say, wait a minute, like what if that happens or what if that happens? That might backfire or that might not work. And that's when I turn to my coach or to a colleague and talk through it. And they help me to say, oh, no, wait a minute. You're just limiting yourself before you even start, or you're convincing yourself that you're not capable before you even start. The quick answer is outside objective thinking is incredibly valuable wherever you get that from. The advantages of doing it in a formal relationship with a coach is that they have no qualms about calling you out because that's what they're paid to do. Whereas a friend or a family member is more likely to say the thing that makes you feel better rather than the thing that you necessarily want to hear. I always say that one of the things my mom did that day when she was in the hospital with me and she told me that I needed to basically suck it up, stop whining, and start looking at the positive. was that she told me what I needed to hear that day, not what I wanted to hear. And that's what you're looking for, is somebody who's willing to do that.
Mark, Carol has asked, she says, I tend to be an early adapter. Her family had a Beta Vision before they had a VCR, so there you go.
Nice.
Our organization is nonprofit and rely on volunteers to implement what we do. We'd already planned to launch an online learning tool and are launching it now a little sooner than expected. I feel motivated. I'm trying to motivate our volunteers to push this out. Is there anything besides being a continuous cheerleader that I should be doing?
If you can help them understand why you're doing it and get them to believe in that why, then it makes all the difference. So what tends to happen when we go through changes like this, and so technology is a great example, is people get caught up in the how, right? They get caught up in the, well, that means I got to learn this new skill, or I don't like computers, or I don't know this software, or whatever. They get caught up in all of the details, which they matter, right? But if you're not seeing the forest for the trees and you're only seeing the challenge, then of course you're not motivated, right? Why did I want to do something that's hard when I don't get why I'm doing it, or I don't see the positive benefit other than because I was told to? If, on the other hand, your volunteers can see that because you're doing this, it's going to allow you to serve more people in a better way, or it's going to allow you to serve anybody right now while you can't see them face to face, and connect the program that you're building to the people that you're serving and how it's going to help them, because chances are good that your volunteers are really motivated by helping the people you serve, right? And so if you can help them see that this is going to allow us to serve these people, then it makes all the difference in the world. People care almost not at all about the how once they understand the why is important enough. And the example I give to people all the time is if you're a parent. And if you're not a parent, you can still probably relate to this. If you're a parent, what will you not do to make sure that your child is successful? Nothing, right? I mean, we will go without sleep. We will go bankrupt. We'll go to the ends of the earth. We would lay down our lives for our child. Why? Because we're superhuman? No, because the why, the purpose, is so big that the how doesn't matter. We just know we'll figure it out because we have to. So if you have that kind of commitment to the projects you're working on, to your business, to your nonprofit, then you'll always figure out a way.
Okay, thanks, Mark. One final question we have time for. Kathy's asking, how do you keep up your energy while trying to keep others around you motivated?
Yeah, great question. Great question. Self-care, right? We can't pour from an empty cup, as we all know. And I think sometimes as leaders, and I will be a little sexist here for a minute, pardon me, but I think women especially fall victim to giving more than they maybe should. Look, we all want to give, we all want to help, we all want to make a difference and do things for others, and that's important. But you can't give what you don't have. And so taking care of yourself is not a selfish act. And we need to get that out of our heads. So I think we've all kind of been raised with that attitude that doing things for yourself is selfish. It's actually selfless, because you can't serve if you're exhausted. So what specifically to do depends on you. For some people, that means you need to get more sleep. For others, it means you need to go to the spa, or we can't do that right now, have a long hot bath, or have your partner give you a massage or something. For others of us, for me, I know it's exercise. If I don't exercise at least 4 or 5 days a week, it affects me. And it's not, I exercise far more for my mental and emotional health than I do for my physical health, because I can feel it in my brain when I don't move. And so for me, that's one of my self-care things. But figure out what those are for you, and then make sure that you're getting time every day to do a little bit of that. Now, we're not all going to go to the spa for a day or take a 3-week vacation, but we can all give ourselves a 20-minute, 30-minute little boost of self-care any time or at any day. Just schedule it. If you have to get up a half hour early to do it, then do that. But you absolutely have to recharge your batteries regularly in order to be your most effective and in order to help others the best.
Right. Thanks, Mark. Somebody just mentioned they tried to access the assessment tool and had some difficulty. So I'm going to recommend that anybody who has any difficulty with the text option to email you, Mark. Is that the best?
Just shoot me an email. That's right. Yeah, and I'll email you right back with the PDF. It could be that there's a glitch with the texting. There shouldn't be, but I tested it beforehand. But we know how that works. Sometimes tests don't always work. So.
And I should mention, Mark, that several people mentioned in the chat how inspiring your story is. So that alone was worth the price of admission, which was free. So appreciate that. That is all the time that we have today. And I really want to thank you, Mark, for sharing your story and these tips. You know, somebody mentioned the other day in a meeting I was in that we may not see it, but this is really a time for opportunity, an opportunity to reinvent. Not even how we live and how we conduct business. So I think that's part of what you were telling us today. Our next Zoom webinar for everyone who's on the call will be tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. And it's on the importance of maintaining your mental health during these times. You know, we have to remember to take advantage or take time for that. And it's going to feature Kelly Etheridge and Andrew LeBlanc from Atlantic Wellness. So you can still register for that session online at ccgm.ca. And if you, we're also in the early stages of planning something specifically for charities and nonprofits who are going to be really challenged coming out of this in terms of fundraising and extending services. So stay tuned for that as well, hopefully maybe as early as next week. So Mark, thanks again for the great presentation, really enjoyable. Thanks everyone for attending. I wish everyone a great day. Stay safe and remember to accept, adapt, and aim high. Thanks, everybody. Bye for now.
Thanks, John.